All right, guys, let's get this 10 bolt re-geared. I'm gonna go over some specialty tools that I use and my method of madness on this stuff. Hey guys, thanks for checking out this new video DIY on a GM 10 bolt setup. Please like and subscribe, man. Help me build my channel. If you guys need prices on parts or anything like that too, you can shoot me a comment and I'll get in touch with you and try to get you a deal. Here's the 10 bolt. It's from an Escalade. I like to use 2 jack stands to hold the axle tubes, one under the snout to keep it level. This is the bottom of a tote that I cut out to drain fluid into. Over here I have my bearings that I've hogged out with a die grinder to make them slip fit on the pinion, to make changing the pinion shims easy to set pinion depth. This is just a box of shims that I have from doing 2 dozen setups. I never throw any shims away because you never know what you might need, even though the new kit comes with shims. Here's a dial indicator with a vice grip attachment. I use that for backlash. Torque wrench, beam type inch-pound torque wrench to set pinion bearing preload, or to measure pinion bearing preload. Shop towels, parts cleaner, some calipers to measure the shim thicknesses when I get to doing some math. Punches so I can punch number 1 and 2 into the carrier caps, so I don't mix them up or flip them upside down. Make sure they're the same as they were when they came out of the axle. This is for the pinion yoke, to hold it still when you're tightening the pinion nut to set the pinion bearing preload. This is a race and seal driver kit to change the pinion outer races on the bearings that are in the housing. And this is a pinion depth tool so that you can measure pinion depth without, you can get your pinion depth really close within one try. You don't absolutely need to have this. I like to use it, and I have it just because I do a lot of axle setups. It just makes it a little bit easier. This is a Pro Form kit. I think it's like 90 bucks. Breaker bar, different flavors of thread locker, and some silicone gasket sealer. First thing I'm going to do, pull that cover off, drain the fluid out, punch the carrier caps so that I have them oriented right when I put it back together. And then we're going to take the guts out and clean everything, and I'll show you guys the new parts. Diff cover's off, fluid's out. You're going to take this little 8mm bolt out so that it will release the spider gear pin. And I just use a box end 6-point wrench for that. Here's that little pin. Or not pin, that's the little bolt that holds the pin in. I'm just going to start putting stuff in this bucket. Now, you can push that pin through one side or the other. There's that, the diff pin. This has a GovLock G80 in it, so it's a little different than the spider gears. Normally right now, spider gears, if you have an open diff, it'll just fall apart right now. You can just take all that shit out. You'll push the axles in right now, take the C-clips off the end of the axles, and then pull the axles out, and all those spider gears and little shims behind them will all fall out, and you can throw them in the bucket. Alright guys, so if you have a GovLock, you take that pin out and then you push the axles in, and you'll be able to get the C-clips off of there. You can kind of see them. It's like that more brownish looking color in there. That's the C-clip. I'll use a magnet or something to get those out. Might take a second. And then the axles will come out. Hey guys, here's that C-clip I'm trying to show you right here. See that? There's the end of it. So I had to tap the axle in with a sledge a little bit. I don't know why. I usually don't have to do that, but anyway. Trying to get this there. See? There's a magnet and a C-clip. Now I can tap that axle out. This one's already out. And we can take the carrier out with the ring gear and the caps. After we punch them, remember we got to punch 1 and 2 into this. Or you can just put a dot. You can do 1 dot on this one, 2 on this one, on the top part of it, just so you remember. Just use a punch like this if you have to. I got number 1 right here. So I'm gonna put a 1 on this guy. And a 2 on this one. Alright guys, the carrier caps are off. I'm just going to find a good spot to put the pry bar on this, and this will fall. It should fall right out of here. Yep. Right in the bucket. Okay. We got a carrier out. Now I'm just going to get the pinion nut off of here. And then this is an 1¼ inch nut on this, guys. There's that. Now, the easiest way to do this is with an air hammer to get the yoke off. You can use a big punch on the end of the pinion splines and just punch the whole thing through the housing. I like to use an air hammer just because it's a little easier. But if you don't have one, you can use a punch. There's your yoke. Now we can just air hammer this through too. And there is the pinion. Alright, so the pinion's out now. Our bucket's pretty full. Next, I'm going to spin this thing up on the jack stands if I can. And I'll get that pinion seal out of the way. Get this seal out of the way, and then once I do that, I can get that outer pinion bearing out, and then I can punch the races out of the housing that are for the pinion bearings. Guys, there's 100 ways to get a seal out. They have seal pullers. You can use a pry bar. I'm going to attempt to do it just with the spade punch on the flange edge. And see, this one's pretty rusty, so probably just going to fall apart on me. I'm just going between the housing and the edge of the seal. There's our seal. Here's our outer pinion bearing. Now I can punch those races out. Just use a big punch like this, 12-inch one or something, with a sledge. And the housing has two little cutouts where this will fit, one on each side. Just go back and forth. There's that one. That was the inner race. Now we're going to get the outer race. Same thing, there's two notches on each side. I'll show you guys. See these notches right here? There's one right here. And one right here. That's where your punch will fit. And it's the same thing down here on this race. One there and one over here. It's a little harder to see. But I'm just going to take this punch and hit it right there, and that'll knock that race out of there. Okay, now our housing is totally empty. Except for the axle seals on the ends, which we'll do those last. So I'm going to brake clean this out, use a blowgun, towel it, get it nice and clean, and then we can open up some of the new parts and get to setting up the pinion depth. Okay, housing's all cleaned out, ready for pinion bearing races. Here's our new stuff. We got Richmond gears and Richmond setup kit. So I gotta cut into this with a razor blade, get all these loose things out of here, and get the bearing races tapped into the housing for the pinion. Here's the inner race for the pinion bearing with that race installer that I showed you guys earlier from Harbor Freight. Oh, that was not the right one. That must be a carrier bearing. Pinion bearing race, and a part of that driver kit that I showed you guys. There's not one that fits this bearing race right, so I've always just used the back side of the biggest one. It's kind of beat up now, but it still works fine. Okay, now we'll do the outer race. This one actually fits correctly, so you can use that. A little towel action here. Grab some here. Alright, so both of the pinion races are in now. You don't want to put your seal in yet, because you need to set your pinion depth and your preload, or figure out roughly where your preload needs to be, with maybe if you need to shim it or not. This is a crush sleeve design, so we can put the seal in when I go to put the crush sleeve in. Yeah, so now we're going to set up the pinion with the setup bearings, the slip fit bearings, and get a rough idea of how many shims we need to get the right pinion depth. Alright guys, so here's our pinion, right? And on most aftermarket pinions, I know for sure Richmond does this, but they etch the desired pinion depth right in the face of the pinion gear, right on the head. So this one says 2.572. So that's our desired pinion depth from the mounting surface that the carrier caps bolt to. And to get a rough idea of where we're at with no shims, this is my setup bearing. See how this just slides slides right on. Normally, for final install, that will have to press on, and there'll be shims behind it. There'll be shims between the bearing and the gear head. To get a rough idea, though, I'm just going to set this in here. And I'm not going to put the rear bearing in, and I'm not going to tighten the nut or anything. I'm just going to kind of push this in here, make sure it spins nice, and get my pinion depth tool and just get a rough idea of where we are right now as far as pinion depth with no shims. Alright guys, I got my pinion tool set up in here. I'm not going to go too far into that because you may or may not be using it, and if you do have one that you're using, it has instructions. So I'm going to measure what I have right now, just as a rough number, like I said. This is set up with a 3-inch extension, so I have to minus that from my, my reading from 3 inches to get the number that we have for depth right now. 0.409. Okay, so my tool reads 0.409. So I take my 3-inch extension, I minus 409 from it, I get 2.591. Our desired pinion depth is 2.572, so that tells us we are 19 thousandths off of desired pinion depth. That's that number that is etched on the gear. So we need 19 thousandths under the head of that pinion to bring it closer, so that our actual pinion depth matches the desired. I have found that when you press the bearing on for final install, it actually tightens the shim pack up, you know, maybe 2 thousandths or so from what I'm miking with the calipers. So what we'll probably do is put like, you know, 21 thousandths or something under the head of that, and drop it in here, and then put the nut and the bearing on the back, and we'll check it and see how far off we are. Okay guys, I got the pinion in there with both setup bearings and the yoke and the pinion nut, and everything's tight. It has a little drag on it. There's no crush sleeve in there. I just was careful when I was tightening it, but it does have a little drag, so we know where all of our slack is taken out between the bearings. And my pinion depth tool now reads 0.427. So if I take the 3-inch extension that's on the tool and I minus 0.427, it gives me 2.573 for pinion depth. So that's 1,000th closer to the center line of the axle than our desired, which is good. So it did take a 30 thousandths shim to get there behind the pinion head, but what I'm going to do is take it all apart now, and I'm going to press the final install bearing on there, and I bet when I do that we'll probably end up 1,000th shy of our target, meaning that the depth will be a little bit deeper instead of being shallow. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll be well on our way to getting the carrier together, the ring gear and all that. Alright, pinion bearing is pressed on, our shim is in there. Awesome. Drop this in there now, and we'll recheck the depth with everything assembled on the pinion. This is your crush sleeve right here. What it does is when the other bearing, I'll use my slip fit one for demonstration. So you have your two races in the diff housing, right? And depending on the space between these two bearings is going to be either obviously loose or too tight. And the crush sleeves job is to space them enough apart to where they're sloppy, and then when you tighten the pinion nut down, it will slowly crush this washer, or this sleeve. And you have to be careful because it will happen quick. You'll get it to where it starts to preload the bearings, and then all of a sudden you'll be too tight. You'll have to get another crush sleeve. If you go slow and you slowly take the slack out, then you'll get that. I think it's like 16 to 25 inch-pounds of rotating torque that's desired on a new bearing setup that you want. But you have to get there slow. So you may have this crush sleeve style, which is not my first choice, or you'll have a solid sleeve in here that's probably a little bit, I mean, obviously it's going to be thinner than this as far as width, and then you'll use shims like these to get the pinion preload that you want. That's the better option. I do like those a lot more because it's not like a one and done deal like this. If you over crush this, then you're screwed. I guess you could shim it too. I don't think you would want to do that, but yeah. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this in here, get the new bearing on there, the new yoke, and we're gonna check the pinion depth one more time, and then we'll put the seal in and final install on the pinion. All right, I kind of skipped ahead here. It took a lot to get that crush sleeve crushed enough to get the play out of between those pinion bearings, but I got it. Obviously I had to hold the yoke with this tool that's bolted on here and then spin the nut at the same time, and it took a lot. But we ended up with about 19 inch-pounds of rotating torque. I'm gonna try to get this on camera for you guys. It's kind of tough though. Let's see if I can do it. It's like I guess that's about 20 right there, 20 inch-pounds or so. The bearings are totally dry right now, so if I sprayed a little bit of oil down in there, it would loosen up a little bit. Our target on the GM 10-bolt axle is 14 to 19 inch-pounds. So we are right there. So the pinion is all done. The depth is right. We ended up only being 1/1000th off of target depth on the pinion depth, so that's awesome. So I'm going to blast that tool off of there, and then we're going to get the ring gear on the new carrier and the new carrier bearings on the carrier, and then we can kind of get a mock fit and start trying to do pinion bearing, carrier bearing preload and the backlash. Got a Eaton True Track here. That's what's going in this now. Now, because there's so many different spline count options, what you guys should do is as soon as you open this or open whatever diff that you bought, whatever carrier, check your axles right now. Make sure your spline count matches. Got the ring gear on. These are reverse thread ring gear bolts, so lefty is tighty. They are 7/16 diameter, so we're going to torque them to 65 foot-pounds. All right, ring gear is torqued, 65 foot-pounds, and I just went over and spent a couple minutes at the press, and I pressed on the carrier bearings onto the carrier. So what we're going to do now is just drop this in the housing, and well, I'll put a couple shims on each side. It's probably going to take me a few tries, so I'll check in with you guys in just a minute, but I'm going to try to get the backlash pretty close, and then I'll show you how to preload the carrier bearings. Here's a bunch of the shims for the carrier bearings. When you pull your 10 bolt apart, it'll have like 2 of these in there, various thicknesses. I've measured all these. They're like between 230 and 255, so almost a 1/4 inch. And then I got lots of thin ones here, some thick ones. They go all the way from like 2 thousandths up to like 30 to 40 thousandths. So really is the possibilities are endless on your setting your backlash and your preload. You can pretty much do it all once you have a really big, nice collection of shims here. And those just go on the back of the bearing races. Between the bearing race and the housing. Okay, I got the carrier in. It's shimmed right now. The caps are torqued, and I've got about 9 thousandths of backlash, which is within spec. They want 6 to 10 thousandths. So the way to get preload in these carrier bearings would be now to take these caps off and add about 3 thousandths shim to each side. Enough so you have to kind of tap it in with a dead blow or a rubber mallet. Get this all apart, and I'll add 3 thousandths to each side to kind of preload those bearings. We'll tap it in. We'll run a paint pattern on the gears, and that's it. Okay guys, I got the 3 thousandths shims on each side to preload, and I got some paint on the teeth now of the ring gear, so we're going to do a little pattern check and see how it looks. When you do this, you want to put a little drag on the ring gear because there's not a lot of friction on that right now. So spin this so you get the paint, so your paint goes, into the pinion. And then when you get it there, you'll want to like grab the ring gear with your hand. Make sure there's the paint. Okay, so, and you're just gonna like kind of spin the yoke with one hand and put opposing pressure on the ring gear with your other hand. You can do this by wedging cardboard into the case or something against the ring gear too, but remember, you got to do it in both directions too, because you want to see the coast and the drive side of the teeth. All right, let's see what we got. I kind of missed it a little bit. I'm going to put some more paint on that, you guys, for a few more teeth, and go back in there and do it again. Alright guys, here's my first pattern. You can see, so remember I was running about, they wanted 6 to 10 thousandths of backlash, and I was right at 10. So I'm on the outside here of the window they want you to be in, and we're also really close to the top of the teeth. So what I'm going to do is take like that 3 thousandths shim that I added on this side, or I added on both sides for preload. I'm going to take the one out of this side and put it over here so that we still have the same preload, we still have the same shim stack total on both sides if you combine them. But it's going to move the ring gear in a little bit and tighten that backlash up, and it should make that pattern drop down in the tooth a little bit and more centered. Alright guys, so I moved that 3 thousandths preloading shim from this side to this side to push that ring gear closer to the pinion gear, which tightened up our backlash to 6 thousandths, and it moved our pattern right in the middle of the teeth there. I'm going to get the axles in. After I do the axle seals, push those in. You follow the instructions for the True Track. You just drop some drop the C-clips in there, there's like a circle block thing that falls in here, and then a plate with a snap ring, and then we'll put the diff cover on and let him put oil in it when he's ready. But for now, that's it, you guys. I'm going to torque those carrier cap bolts to 60 foot-pounds. Those are 5/8 bolts, by the way. That's the size of the socket you need. And that is how you rebuild a GM 10 bolt. Thanks for watching, you guys.